Good morning students. Hope all of you are fine. Beta, as you know that we have done revision of chapter 2 and name of that chapter was the writing and city life, right? So beta, today we will start revision of chapter 3 and name of this chapter is the empire across three continents. Beta, in this chapter particularly we will read about the Roman Empire. So beta, the Roman Empire, it covered a vast stretch of territory. Like it is very clear with its name that this empire was spread across the three continents. So its stretch was very vast and it included most of Europe as we know it today and a large part of fertile Crescent and North Africa. So in this chapter we will just read that how this empire was organized and the political forces that shaped its destiny and the social groups into which people were divided. Even we will also discuss about the empire embraced a wealth of local cultures and languages, and even in this specific empire the women had a stronger legal position than they do in many countries today. Means if we compare with the present condition, at that time also in Roman Empire the women they had a very strong position. So beta, even in this country much the economy was run on the slave labor, denying freedom to substantial number of person. So it means the complete equality was not there. With that beta, from the 5th century on the empires fell apart in the west but remained intact and prospered in the eastern half. Means in west it became weak but in east it remained the same. So beta, even whenever we are just discussing any topic of history, it is based on evidences. So the Roman historians they have a rich collection of sources to go on. Now what are these three collection of sources? Beta, these are text, documents and the material remains. Now out of these the textual sources include histories of the period written by contemporaries, and these were usually called annals because in this the letters, speeches, laws and all these things were included. And the documentary sources they include mainly inscriptions, and then these inscriptions were usually cut on stone. So a large number of that survive, means all these inscriptions they were carved on stone. With that beta, that papyrus, it was a reed-like plant that grew along the banks of the river Nile in Egypt and was processed to produce a writing material that was very widely used in everyday life. So thousands of contracts, accounts, letters and official documents survive on papyrus and have been published by scholars who are called papyrologists. Even the third, textual document material remains include a very wide items that mainly archaeological discover. Material remains like we can talk about some fort also. Now there are remains of those archaeological sources, and those are known as the material remains. In that beta, for example like buildings, monuments and other kinds of structures, pottery, coins, mosaics, even entire landscapes, and even some aerial photography also, all these are included in the material remain. And each of these sources can only tell us just so much about the past, and combining them can be a fruitful exercise. It means beta, our history is based on the various evidences, right? When the historian they just compile all these evidences and then they write the history. Like in this chapter we will read about the Roman Empire. So beta, two powerful empires they ruled over most of the Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East in the period between the birth of Christ and the early part of the 17th century. So the two empires were those of Rome and Iran. The Romans and Iranians, they were rivals and they fought against each other for much of their history. Their empires lay next to each other because these were adjoining empires. As you know, the rulers at that time, they just wanted to increase their territories. So that is why every time these both were rivals of each other. Even these empires, like they were rivals. And beta, if we will see on this map, you can see this map beta. The continents of Europe and Africa, they are separated by a sea that stretches all the way from Spain in the west to Syria in the east. You can see this sea beta, it is the Mediterranean Sea which just separate the Africa and the Europe continent. So this is called the Mediterranean, and it was the heart of Rome's empire. Rome dominated the Mediterranean and all the regions around that sea in both direction. Means all this area that is surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, all that area was under Roman Empire. North as well as south. To the north, the boundaries of the empire were formed by two great rivers, the Rhine and Danube to the south, and by the huge expanse of desert called the Sahara. As you know, the Sahara desert, it lies in upper part of Africa. So this vast stretch of territory was the Roman Empire. Iran controlled the whole area south of the Caspian Sea down to eastern Arabia and the sometimes large parts of Afghanistan as well. So these two superpowers had divided up most of the world that the Chinese called Tachin. So this way beta, at that time the major power was divided between these two empires, Roman and Iraq. So beta, this was about the brief description of their empire. Now the next topic is about beta the early empire. The Roman Empire, it can broadly be divided into two phases, early and late, and divided by the 3rd century as a historical watershed between them, and even the whole period, even the main part of the 3rd century can be called the early empire, and the period after that the late empire. So even a major difference between the two superpowers and their respective empires was the Roman Empire was culturally much more diverse than that of Iran, and the Parthians and later the Sasanians, the dynasties that ruled Iran in this period, ruled over a population that was largely Iranian. Means हमने यहाँ पे क्या देखा कि जो हमारी रोमन एम्पायर थी, there the people of different community, different caste and religion, they were concluded, but the Iranian dynasty, there most of the people, the population that was Iranian. So the Roman Empire by contrast was a mosaic of territories and cultures. बेटा ये different cultures कहाँ से आते हैं किसी empire में? These culture comes from the different territories. So even many languages were spoken in the empire because people they were related to different areas. But for the purposes of administration, Latin and Greek were the most widely used languages, and the upper classes of the east spoke and wrote in Greek, and even those of the west in Latin, and the boundary between these broad languages area ran somewhere across the middle of the Mediterranean between the African provinces of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. It means the map we have seen, see beta this map, it's north to Mediterranean Sea, that area spoke Greek, and the area that touches Africa, that area speak Latin, right? So and even all those who lived in the empire were subjects of a single ruler, the emperor, regardless of where they lived and what language they spoke. So, this regime, it established by Augustus, the first emperor in 27 BC, was called the Principate. Although Augustus was the sole ruler and the only real source of authority, but the fiction was kept alive that he was actually only the leading citizen, not the absolute ruler. This was done out of respect for the Senate and the body which had controlled Rome earlier. It means that before that ruler Augustus, Senate controlled the government of Rome. So that is why he was not known as the absolute ruler. The Senate had existed in Rome for centuries and had been and remained a body representing the aristocracy. And this Senate, it consists of the wealthiest families of Roman and later Italian descent, mainly landowners. So most of the Roman histories that survive in Greek and Latin, they were written by the people from a senatorial background. So it is very clear that the emperor was judged by how they behaved towards the Senate. It means Senate was very powerful. And the worst emperors were those who were hostile to the senatorial class, behaving with suspicion or brutality and violence. Means whosoever emperor, he was not in the favor of this Senate, they were known as the cruel emperor. And even many senators yearned to go back to the days of the republic, but most must have realized that this was impossible because now it was the time of monarchy. So the next of the emperor and the senate, the other key institution of imperial rule was the army. But now you can see the hierarchy of Rome, like senate, king, and now the second most important institution was the army. As you know, beta, all the empires, those were established just because of the armies. So army was very important at that time. Like army of its rival in the Persian Empire, which was a conscripted army, the Romans had a paid professional army where soldiers had to put in a minimum of 25 years of service. The existence of a paid army was a distinctive feature of the Roman Empire. Means this was a specific features. The soldiers, they were employed and they were paid for that. And the army was the largest single organized body in the empire. And it certainly had the power to determine the fate of emperors. As I was telling you, the luck of any destiny of any territory or empire, it is completely based on the army. If the army is powerful, the empire will be powerful. So the soldiers would constantly agitate for better wages and service conditions. As the soldiers, they were aware about their importance. And these agitations often took the form of mutinies. If the soldiers felt let down by their generals or even the emperor, then they agitated and sometimes they created rebel also. So if we see this in a single way, the Roman army depends largely on the way they were portrayed by historians with senatorial sympathies. The Senate hated and feared the army because it was a source of often unpredictable violence, especially in the tense condition of the 3rd century when government was forced to tax more heavily to pay for its mounting military expenditure. So beta, this was the topic for today. Still few points are left. Those are related to the early empire that we will discuss in next lecture. So read this topic carefully. Thank you and have a nice day.